Okay, hi, I'm Frank. Thank you all so much for your presentation so far, and thank you for the curating, because there's some overlap between what I'm talking about and what you guys were just talking about, so that's cool. Today's presentation has 3 primary focuses, and they're each pretty broad because they're based on a review of literature that I started back in 2014, a long time ago, and some of my own theories from my own teaching. First, when I began this research, I was trying to think about like a student-centered composition pedagogy, and I asked myself, what do undergraduate composers need to know and need to be able to do to be successful? Second, of the innumerable, the crazy amount of things that we can teach, of all the things that the articles and books out there prescribe, I think that form is among the most important to help empower students regardless of their background and their stylistic biases. And lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we assess the creativity of a student, which is, I think, very precarious. One of the reasons I underwent this work, like I said, was to kind of triangulate a curriculum that was somewhat standardized. It was 2014. I was much younger and much more foolish. But when I first reviewed the literature back then, I came across a few things that were kind of common or brought up a lot across the different articles and books. And here's where the overlap's going to start: audiation, score analysis, counterpoint, ability to critique one's own work, variation, orchestration, and ability to use Western music notation, standard notation. At first, it seemed like there was a paucity of composition pedagogy literature or textbooks or articles that said, hey, here's how to teach this. But as we'll see, as we go forward in this presentation, I think that the opposite is true. The exact opposite is true. I'm not sure if I missed stuff in 2014 or if there's a lot of new stuff, but yeah, I think the opposite problem is true. So the fairly short list of techniques that I just went over suggests that we can indeed come to a standardized curriculum, right? Wrong. Gotcha. There's 2 issues. There's 2 issues that come up. First, these techniques are clearly coming from the Western concert music tradition, which is neither good nor bad. It is. And then from that, a contradiction arises, and this is the second issue, which is that, it would be great for all of us, for our sanity and for our pay, if there were a standard from which we could create a curriculum, create a lesson plan that applies to most, if not all, students. But composition teachers and students alike tend to eschew functional tonality or Western music broadly. And this creates a little bit of instability in our teaching, right? Because that's what most of our students learn about. In my most recent review of the literature that I've been doing over the past few months, I've come to find a truly, truly overwhelming amount of techniques and methods and many, many more books and articles that teach how to write music. So this list, which is smaller than the one you showed, but this is probably like everything you had, and then you had a bunch more. This is a truncated list, much like yours was. I literally sat down for like 3 hours and started making a list and like putting in citations of this book said that, and oh, this book said that too, and oh, here's a new thing a book said. I had to stop for my own sanity. And Spanish music educator Daniel Mateos Moreno asks, is it possible to teach music composition? And I think that's a really fair question to ask, given the destabilizing effect of rejecting functional tonality and rejecting, huge parts of the Western concert music tradition, as sometimes happens. Not always, of course. So what are the vices and virtues of kind of the other end of the spectrum, a sort of postmodern approach to teaching music composition. Teaching these innumerable approaches to technique and various methods may not just be overwhelming, but it may lead to a lack of proficiency in any one way of creating a finished piece. And it providing successful experiences to our first year and second year students is really important for retention. So if we're just throwing stuff at them, if we say, hey, here's 1 billion colors, paint us a picture, that is overwhelming. And that's bad for retention, and then we don't have jobs, the whole thing. But I believe that teaching a wide variety of approaches and techniques and methods from within and outside of the Western music tradition can be very liberating if framed correctly, and with a plan in mind. Creating the plan, any plan under these conditions that I've just been talking about is hard. It requires a lot of work, and we're talking about creating a different lesson plan, if not a different curriculum, for every single student. That's like so overwhelming. But just as we want to create something systematic for them, we should do that for ourselves. I think the payoff for our students will be huge if we can think about this. So even at schools where there are multiple composition professors, if you have a student and they just started their composition studies with you, whether it's in a class or in lessons, if you together with them create an individualized lesson plan or curriculum, you can keep that throughout their studies, or you can pass it along to their next teacher, right? So that's one part. You have a little bit of time to game plan. It doesn't have to be right away. I mean, I forget, one of the other presentations talked about getting to know your student, right? This is a very important thing for us, especially when we're doing classroom. That can be really hard, but it's important. Taking stock of a student's unique goals and taking into account an institution's requirements that will help you create a lesson plan and a curriculum. And I think this already happens quite organically. In my experience as a teacher and as a student, this happens pretty organically. But if we can codify such a practice, if we can codify how to approach it, then I think this postmodern approach is actually very manageable. Furthermore, beginning or intro to composition courses, Composition 1, or whatever they may be called, these courses, from what I've seen, already kind of throw a lot of things out, like try this, try that, try this, try that, and that's a good thing. I think it helps the students understand what tools they can use to help them with their unique creative practice. So one tangible way of dealing with the number of techniques and methods available to students is to teach a variety of formal models. Among the collection of concepts that the literature prescribes, form is probably the most undefined and adaptable outside of maybe improvisation. I theorize that teaching form in a variety of ways may be the best way to deal with a highly individualized curriculum. In his 2019 presentation, Tell Me a Story by Greg Simon, he argues that, quote, all students, regardless of background, already possess models for formal and structural expression, end quote. Simon is referring specifically to narrative design, to storytelling, but if students learn any framework or can draw on any framework in which they can host their musical ideas, it empowers them to create a thing that they go, hey, here world, I made a thing. Doesn't matter how simple it is, doesn't matter how short it is, that empowers them, that gives them those successful experiences early on that we know from thinking about pedagogy is so important. Alan Belkin has several chapters on standard common practice forms in his book, Musical Composition, Craft and Art, binary form, ternary form, rondo, concerto, things like that. These forms are familiar to one degree or another for most music students who've gotten through 2 or 3 semesters of studies. And chapter titles with clear content like binary form, rondo form, he juxtaposes those with chapter titles like punctuating and exploring and motive, things that are really generalized. I've implemented a similar model with a lot of success in my own teaching, and take it with a grain of salt. This is some stuff that I've done. Maybe you'll try it out. But this idea of teaching some specific techniques and then putting them within a form. And for the sake of time, we're just going to go through a few of these. This first one was by an 8-year-old composition student who gave themselves the stage name Unicorn 12, which was great. And the assignment, this was a few months into our studies, the assignment was to compose a ternary form piece where the A sections were a period and the B section was a sentence. Simple as that. And they sort of had already talked about improvisation with me. They got pretty confident with that. They talked about with me creating phrases, stringing phrases together, and then they learned these different themes, sentences, periods, and then we just plug it all into this form, and you have a piece. It's done. And this is from a recording we made at the academy, and they shared it with their family and friends, and it was so powerful for them. Fun, right? I saw you dancing. Yeah. So this is obviously very tonal. All the music they had played up to this point was functionally tonal, and I think part of that too is the tools. This was written using standard notation, but that type of notation does not need to be standard. So with another student, same age actually, about 8 years old, one of our earliest exercises, so Unicorn 12 did this same type of exercise, but this is from another student who I prompted to create a piece using shorthand notation. Now, they did include treble clef and bass clef. They had to have some tie to something they knew, I think. And I think that told them, which hand to use and whatnot. And this was very intimidating for them. I actually think I did a bad job with this in terms of framing it, but I think it could work if we work up to it a little bit better. But they were able to finish it after 2 weeks of a little bit of back and forth, and I think that's for a few reasons. Again, this is one of their earliest exercises. I think one of the biggest reasons was I just told them to write a binary form piece, which is something we had already done. Write something, and then write something else, and put them together, and you have a piece, right? It's not complicated, writing music. Don't tell anybody, right? Except our students, but it's really not. And so, you can see on the bottom their little legend that they made, long notes, short notes, seconds, thirds, stops. So there's an improvisatory aspect to it too. So this is to help them think about ways that they can imagine music outside of the typical paradigm, outside of the tradition that we're used to. So here's, I'm going to skip this one. So this is an example from a high school student. I asked them to compose a short story, write a very short story, and then use that narrative flow of the story to dictate the structure and the mood of the piece. And if you can't see it, I'll tell you there's some lines from the story in there that actually function as expressive markings. And this was just a way, again, to get them thinking about how can I put my musical ideas in a form, or how can I take something extra musical to create a structure that, again, empowers the student to say, look, world, I made a thing. It's done, and I'm confident sharing it with you. Whoops. This is Gloria Coates' pre-compositional sketch to her 7th string quartet, Angels, which is for string quartet and organ. It's really cool. I gave this to that same high school student who wrote the previous piece, and I said, I explained kind of what a pre-compositional sketch could be. It could be shapes, it could be a poem or a story like they had done before. And I said, decide arbitrarily some parameters to assign to some of the shapes, to how there's an assent, there's a cross, there's an X, right? And I compared and contrasted the piece that he wrote based on this to her piece. It was totally different, but it was a really fun experience and a really fun experiment in how can I create music outside of common practice forms. So I talked a lot about rondo, binary, ternary. Those are all great to get a student just creating and saying, I made a thing, world, look at the thing I made. It's so important. But I think that incorporating things like this are also important. So having a systematic approach to this sort of postmodern approach is, I think, the key. So I want to frame where we are in the talk. We talked a little bit about the problem of the plethora of techniques. We talked about how form can kind of be used as a way to host those techniques and host musical ideas, whether improvised or written down, whether they come from a corporeal place of improvisation or an analytical place of audiating something and writing it down. Now I want to just talk for a few minutes about assessment. There's this book called The Complete Idiot's Guide to Music Composition. I hate the title because we should not call each other, ourselves, or our students idiots, but this is what you do when you do a review of literature. You go on Amazon and look for books, and this came up. I love the content, though, of the first chapter. It's subtitled, What Kind of Composer Do You Want to Be? This question should be asked of every composition student. Whether or not they can come with a precise or confident answer to that question, I think that is how we start building that individualized curriculum, that individualized lesson plan. It empowers our students with an agency to say, this is the artist that I want to be. We shouldn't tell them what kind of artist they should be. That's what I think. That's an opinion. Some of this is opinion, some of it isn't, but that's an opinion. That's what I think. Have any of you heard of the Consensual Assessment Technique, CAT? Really? Okay, yeah. So from things that I've read, from things I've experienced, from things I've heard from other people, a sort of one-on-one or one-on-classroom version of the consensual assessment technique is a big part of how creativity is graded. And I find it very troubling. So the consensual assessment technique is perhaps the best logistical option for like a juried competition. It's essentially this system of having a panel of experts, right? Which I think we're all experts, but we all have different, different brains, right? So that's kind of weird to like say, okay, these 3 people are going to judge you. And it's upheld with, in my analysis, very shaky research, but it is upheld with research, and we can talk about that more if you want. But I think we should avoid that. I think we should move toward a individualized lesson plan and curriculum. And so part of what I've been trying out is at the beginning, and a lot of you probably do something like this, at the beginning of a student's studies, we will write down in a Google Doc, in a physical journal, in a Dropbox file, what kind of composer do you want to be? What are your artistic goals? What are your professional goals? And sometimes they have no idea how to answer those questions. And that's okay. Then you can just play around and write some music and improvise and you can kind of help them figure it out. This is very complicated, right? This is a complex thing, but a lot of times they can't answer that question, but a lot of times they can. And if they can't, you can guide them. So from there, when you have that journal to check your work against, you can say periodically throughout the semester, let's look at that journal. Are our activities consistent with your goals? If there is significant inconsistencies, you might need to change the goals, or you might need to change the activities. And that is what I'm calling individualized goal setting, and I think that is one foil to the consensual assessment technique, where it's like an expert or experts tells you if your art is getting an A or a B or a C or a D. I hate grades so much. It's annoying. And another assessment technique that I recently learned about from my colleague David McDonald from Wichita State University, which you all heard about Friday morning, was Liz Lerman's critical response process. And I'm not going to get into that because David already gave a great presentation on that, but I want us to think about how we can say to our students, can we look them in the eyes and say, this isn't good? I mean, we can, but I think we should think about whether or not we should. So I really appreciate you guys listening to my talk, and it's been so great being here with all of you. I can really tell that there's this love and care that you all have for your students, and we're all just here trying to figure out how to help them. And I love that. And to that end, I want to, if you go to this website, it's my website /comppedbib. My bibliography is there. I've already learned a couple things that aren't on there, so I'll keep adding to it, and I hope you send me suggestions. But if you go there, you can download the bibliography that I have. Yeah, thanks again, and I'd love to open it up to discussion.
Thanks so much. I think you raised your hand in record time.
Yeah, Bradley Green, because I didn't introduce myself before. I have so many questions, but I'm going to just kind of whittle it down, I guess. In all the research that I did, and me and Andy did before we did the survey, we were trying to find, like, just the skills and experience like we talked about, but also just like a common thread. Mm-hmm. And the common thread we found in terms of like the end goal for a student to learn in composition is self-editing or self-criticism, or basically the ability to edit the music themselves. Yeah. Or, and it said it in a bunch of different ways. One said, be able to compose without the teacher present. And I think that's a great goal, but I also find it to be so broad to be pedagogically useless. So what are your thoughts on that as like a broad goal?
Can you restate the goal one more time?
The ability to self-edit.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, our students should be able to do that eventually, right? They have to move on at some point, right? You at a certain point, kids move out of the house. At a certain point, your dog passes away. Like, there's just, you have to get to the next place, right? So, yeah. And what you and I probably know, that came up a lot. Like being able to critique your own work. Arnold Schoenberg has a whole book about, well, not a whole book, but a whole section in his book devoted to that, which is fascinating, but steeped in his own biases. Like, it's clear, like, it's just like, yeah, critique your work as if it were mine. So I'm sorry I don't have more elaboration, but yeah, I think yes. Yeah.
That's what I was thinking, just because, like, isn't that the job of every teacher to make the teacher useless? So
yeah, that's a great way to put it. That's a great way to put it.
So that's why I was just wondering, like, you see it everywhere, but I think it's a good goal, but I agree, it's kind of like, well, yeah,
of course.
It's self-evidently true.
But sometimes, a great teacher of mine said, sometimes the obvious things are those that need to be restated the most. So, yeah. I think I saw a hand. Was it Sky or? Oh, sorry. You're so close that
I know, sorry. It's Jessica Rudman. So this was fantastic, but thank you. So I've been thinking a lot about the individualized goal setting and planning for students. And I was wondering if you have thought at all about the idea of contract grading in conjunction with it. I don't know what that is. So contract grading is an idea where instead of you as the teacher creating a grading scheme and implementing it on the student, if it's a group class, you would all sit down together and sort of work out, how you're going to grade things and how much things will be worth and blah, blah, blah. But it seems like on a one-on-one situation, I've been thinking about maybe implementing that next semester. So I was just curious about your thoughts.
I said I didn't know what that was, but it's only because since 2014, I morphed what you just said into individualized goal setting. Okay. So when you start explaining it, that's exactly what it is. Okay. It's a contract to say, if you do the work that is consistent with the goals you're trying to achieve, I don't care what you do or how you do it. Well, within a box. If you do it, if you try to achieve those goals, how could I possibly give you anything less than 100%? If you write a piece that I don't like, I'm not going to give you a bad grade. So yes.
Do you set with them sort of the standards for, okay, this is what you would need to do to get an A, this is what you would need to do to get a B, and so forth?
Yeah, and that, that sort of grading scale that we were kind of all made to put in our university syllabi, we figured that out, and it's kind of a rolling process. It's an ongoing thing. Like, I don't want to write jazz anymore. I want to write electroacoustic music halfway through the semester. I've never had that. I'm just thinking about, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I got 3 minutes. I'm just kidding.
Thanks. Yeah, actually my question kind of relates to what you just said about like someone saying like, oh, I don't want to write jazz, I want to write electroacoustic, and how that's never happened to you. And I think that like sometimes one of the problems with actually asking, especially at the undergraduate level, a student what kind of the composer they want to be, is they actually don't know what kind of music is out there in the world. So like a composer like the piece you show with the piano piece is very standard, like nothing sort of postmodern about that at all. Maybe they just don't know that they could write a piece that is, a field recording, like Elizabeth A. Baker performing, her synth in a field, or like one of George Lewis's mixes between like a fully notated hardcore orchestra piece that's also improvised, that also has surrounds. Like, so students actually don't know, like oftentimes their preferences are simply informed by the music that is around them and that shapes them, and they actually don't know what they want to do until they're exposed to those things. So I was wondering what you think, how that fits into your talk, because I was a little bit confused about the postmodern thing, because I thought,
I'll elaborate on that a little bit.
Because I felt like all your examples were pretty like within the Euro diasporic context of like notation and language in terms of like people writing melodies and harmonies. And
postmodernism is also a European concept.
Sure. But I guess I'm wondering about that kind of stuff and how it relates to student agency in an undergraduate context where students actually have limited exposure, and it's our job as teachers to show them what's possible.
Yeah, and that's what you just said, and I'm so sorry if I wasn't clear about it, but what you just said is my point. We should take the postmodern approach where we do eschew any one particular style, and we give the students, whether it's through a beginning composition course, which a lot of places have, or it's their first semester of lessons, and you say, let's try a bunch of stuff. That's why I said, this list here is very daunting, but let's show it to them. Let's let them figure out which of these tools they can harness for their unique creative needs. And I think Unicorn 12's piece, although standard, was awesome. I saw some of you dancing and bobbing your heads. So, even though it fits within, it's totally functionally tonal, I don't care. Like, even if I found it boring, she created this thing that she was proud of. She was so happy to have this recorded, to be able to share it with people. So, to answer your question more specifically, I'm meandering a little bit. That is such a great concern, because it's like, we are informed by what's around us, of course, and I think we should embrace that, but we should also take what I'm saying as the postmodern approach to say, there is no meta-narrative, there's no musical meta-narrative that we have to accept. Let us figure out, through learning these various methods, what works for you. What is your musical language? not what is the musical language. Oh my gosh, did that answer your question?
I don't think I asked my question very well.
But good talk. Yeah, thank you though. It gets me thinking about how to deal with those questions better. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Jimmy, real quick.
Yeah, one more probably. Yeah.
This is pretty similar to what Katie was asking, I think, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot this year and also the last 2 days, which is, everyone has a different baseline about what music they have experienced and how they've experienced that music, but everyone has at least listened to music before, right? Everyone has some kind of intuition about how music works and what music is. So my question is, how do you decide as a teacher when to affirm that intuition versus when to challenge it?
I think that Lindsay gave a great model for how to answer that question. Right? When you were talking about the student that would only, maybe it wasn't you, the 4-chord loop. Yeah. For me, especially if I had, honestly, of any age, if I just had a student who every piece they wrote was like almost the same, I'd probably let him do it for a really long time until I finally was like, because maybe they would eventually like start to change it and start to develop it. Maybe at a certain point, I would say, hey, there are other chords. Let's play around with those. I mean, I can't answer your question specifically because I didn't sign up to do a workshop. Otherwise, I could maybe model what I might do.
Pushing, right? You can push a little bit.
Yeah, of course. We're supposed to push.
So much that they want to stop.
Yeah, because, and like I keep saying, having those successful experiences early on is so important. Empower them to finish something. Many things if you can. No matter how boring you think it is, no matter how dumb you think it is, no matter how repetitive it is, no matter how much it's ripping off Ravel. That was me when I was in college. So, to answer your question, I don't know. At some point, I would probably challenge them. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Frank.